All right. Hey, and welcome, everybody. Welcome to Monster Monday for Tuesday, or for Monday, February 15th, 2021. I am your host, DM Gallibond. All right, tonight on Monster Monday, we are going to take a look at yet another monster out of the uh, Myst- Mythic Odysseys of Theros sourcebook. So it's a monster that started off in Magic the Gathering and was ported into D&D 5th edition with that particular expansion that came out last year. This monster is called the Ashen Rider, and we're debuting a little bit of a new feature within Monster Monday tonight based on some feedback from somebody on YouTube. So I hope that that will be instructive as we start to tell you a little bit about tactics you can use if you are a DM and you're going to run one of these characters to play against your players, and also a little bit about things you want to watch out for um, when you uh, when you are a player facing one of these monsters because of some of the features that it has. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cut the music and get on with this particular here show. All right, so what exactly is an Ashen Rider? Well, an Ashen Rider is an Archon, and an Archon is a celestial, but in Mythic Odysseys of Theros, Archons are always evil. So evil celestials, that makes it a bit unique in the pantheon of D&D creatures right there. So the fall of the ancient Archon empires left some Archons bitter and resentful. Seeking to avoid the spread of human civilizations, these Archons made their way to the underworld. Horrors of that plane broke their minds, bodies, and spirits, and twisted them into terrifying Archons known as Ashen Riders. When they ride forth upon the mortal world, terrified mortals make offerings in a desperate attempt to appease them. But the Ashen Riders aren't merciful, and they delight in reducing paragons of the mortal world to ash. There's a lot to unpack there, and when it comes to the tactics, you're just going to see just how terrifying these things are as D&D monsters. Now, I've done a lot of conversion of Magic the Gathering monsters to D&D for my Planeswalking game that we do on Sundays. And I have to tell you that most of the time it feels like they tone down the monsters when they convert it, or when Wizards of the Coast converts it to Magic the Gathering, or to D&D from Magic the Gathering. I feel like with this one, they may have kicked it up a notch, like they were eating at Emerald's place. All right, so let's take a look at what the Ashen Rider was out of Magic the Gathering in the Theros expansion. It's a creature Archon, costs 8 to cast, requires 2 white, 2 black, and 4 colorless mana, or 4 mana of any color. Uh, and it has flying, so when it enters the battlefield or it dies, exile a target permanent. So you get to bring this card out and force another card off the table, and then when the card goes away, you force another card off the table. And the flavor text on this: one offering to appease her on arrival, another to celebrate her departure. Now, some of the lore about this: the Archons were conquerors ruling vast empires. They saw themselves as champions of merciless justice, so justice without mercy. And they ruled with iron fists. Their dominance came to an end, And when they toppled, they scattered to the fringes of the world, and their holdings developed into the cities within Theros of the plane of Theros of today. Uh, the age of archons is long past, but a lot of people wonder if the few surviving might attempt to reestablish their empire, or if they really accept their lesser role in the world. I don't know. All kinds of power. Probably not going to be content to just sit around. But that's what makes it so fun when you think about putting these monsters in D&D, is you get to decide how they are going to act. So we've talked a lot on this show, Monster Monday, about how every creature type in D or every creature in D&D needs a creature type. And in this instance, the Ashen Riders are Celestials. So Celestials are normally creatures native to the upper planes. I mean, that's even right in this is text straight out of the monster manual. D&D conceives of celestials as things being from the upper planes, servants of the gods, messengers from the gods, those types of things. With the mythology and lore of Theros, with these archons, they turn that on their head, and the archons become evil instead of celestial and good. The Ashen Riders are deadly evil. So this makes them especially fun to play with, especially if you have a character like a cleric who can identify creatures as undead, fiends, celestials, whatever. If they see one of these coming from a distance and they say, I wonder what kind of creature that is. Oh, it's a celestial. It's probably going to be nice to us. Famous last words. That's when the DM smiles and the players all know they are in trouble. They're good by nature, according to D&D, the D&D Monster Manual. Not so fast, my friends. Not so fast. Okay, now we're going to go and take a look at um, some of the resources, source books, and other kinds of things to talk a little bit about these monsters, how they come from. How they come from Magic the Gathering, and yes, here we go. All right. I hate it when that happens. All right. Here is the Magic the Gathering wiki for the plane of Theros. This is a good resource if you're going to run a D&D campaign, either that is set in the plane of Theros or if you're going to mine monsters out of Theros, because this gives you kind of an overview of the plane, and then it breaks down the history, the different ages and eras, locations from the plane, the some of the biggest cities, most important locations, some of the geography, and a bunch of the races. Uh, Also talks about the languages that are spoken. So you can really get a good idea of how to put elements of this in your D&D campaign. And it is a nice complement to the Mythic Odysseys of Theros source book that they published for D&D. Now, when we also look at this particular wiki and we look at archons, it's interesting to note that archons are creatures that appear in different Magic the Gathering expansions, and they're always a little bit different in every plane where they appear. And so this again is something that's kind of interesting to interesting to review and look at if you're going to use archons in your campaigns, because depending on which archon you're going to get out of which Magic the Gathering expansion, they all have a little bit of a different properties. So here's the archons from Theros. They had a massive empire tyrannizing the world and believed they were imposing strict justice. And that was known as the Age of Trax. And it talks about some specific archons, and then it breaks down more of the types of archons. Um, so we have the Ashen Riders. Despondent archons took refuge in the underworld. Their minds, bodies, spirits were twisted, turning them into monstrous variants who delight in culling mortals. And it talks a little bit about their steeds. And yes, folks, we do get the benefit of them having transported the Archon seeds or steeds over to D&D from Magic the Gathering as well. So we're going to look at those in just a couple of minutes. Those steeds are evil creatures, typically bulls or lions, that also have the ability to fly. And because of some of the features of archons, them having flying mounts makes them especially tricky to deal with when you are a party. And if you are a DM thinking about how to use these guys, you can take that sort of two parts of the monster and use it to your advantage to really set up a tough challenge for your players. So here is the from the source book, Mythic Odysseys. Here's what they say about archons in general. Um, which is kind of what we talked about in the lore of the archons. And then we get to the actual Ashen Rider themselves. So, like we said, it's a celestial that's lawful evil. Uh, I think this may be the only celestial in D&D that is evil. I'm not going to swear to that, but I believe there's not many that it has for company. So this makes it a very rare monster type indeed. Um, plate armor, so armor class 18, 178 hit points. Uh, so it's a big bucket of hit points already. CR 16, so it makes them uh, very tough. It's got true sight of 120 feet, so you cannot fool it with invisibility or illusions. Passive perception of 20, so it's very hard to evade it with stealth. It's immune to thunder damage, and it's immune to being charmed, exhausted, or frightened. Now, some of the things that it does are that make it very tough are its aura of silence. So anytime a PC or any other creature starts its turn within 30 feet of the rider can choose to force that creature to make a wisdom saving throw. And if it fails the save, the creature cannot speak and is also deafened until the start of its next turn. So spellcasters, good luck casting any spells that have any verbal components. Also, good luck at being able to hear anything that your fellow party members are saying when you get that close. It also has some spell casting ability. At will, it can command other creatures, and it can cast Compel Duel, which basically which gives a creature disadvantage on attacking anything except the Ashen Rider. And then one time a day, it can do banishment. Now, I have used banishment, or I've had monsters that use banishment against my party members because the party members love using banishment against monsters. And that will that will actually take a PC out of the fight for as long as the Ashen Rider can maintain concentration. How long that is, that's gonna kind of depend on how successful the party is in dealing damage and how much damage they can deal to force those Constitution saves. Or, of course, I guess you could. I don't know, I don't think you can break it with a counter spell after it's already been cast, but something that would dispel it. Then also the blade barrier, physical hindrance to keep anybody from being able to get to it. Now it's got this mount ability. We talked about how there's the mount. It can magically, using a bonus action, it can magically teleport onto its mount as long as both the Ashen Rider and the mount are on the same plane. So it doesn't have to be within a certain number of feet. It just has to be on the same plane. So one of the tactics that you might use as a DM is you might have the mount land, let the Ashen Rider dismount, and then the mount take off and fly up in the air again. And when the Ashen Rider is fighting, if it gets in trouble, it can just teleport with a bonus action right back up um, to the back of its mount, and now you have a recurring enemy that you may have driven it away, but it's going to remember and it's going to be coming after you again. So that's kind of a fun thing that you can do uh, when you have a little bit of a higher level party. Now, once it's mounted, the Ashen Rider cannot be surprised. Both it and its mount have advantage to dexterity saving throws. Uh, The Ashen Rider gets to attack both with melee weapons and with ranged spell attacks. And this is important because it's one of the few creatures that has the ability to deal both radiant and necrotic damage. So there's a lot of things in D&D. There's a lot of features, classes. Some classes, some races wind up getting resistance to, let's say, radiant damage, or they get resistance to necrotic damage. But it's rare that you find anything that gets resistance or immunity to both radiant and necrotic. One of the few examples I can think of is maybe a Totem of the Bear Barbarian, which gets resistance to all kinds of damage except for Psychic, I believe. That's the only one that it doesn't get resistance to. So when they go into their rage, they can mitigate a lot of damage, but a lot of your other characters, they're going to be really vulnerable or really have a really hard time dealing with something that can deal both radiant and necrotic damage. Now, notice the radiant damage comes from the melee weapon. The necrotic damage comes from its ranged weapon, and that's a 120-foot ranged weapon, so that's nothing to sneeze at. It can hit you from a long way away. Now, certainly, somebody armed with a longbow or things like fireball, stuff like that, they have a range as long or longer. Another thing that makes this a real challenge is legendary actions. 3 legendary actions, and one of them is super nasty. Uh, it gets an extra attack as a legendary action, so it can get one more Ashen Blade or one more Bolt of Ash attack. Coordinated Assault, it can make an attack, and then the mount can make a separate attack. And we're going to look at what the mounts can do in just a moment. And then the worst one is, or the most scary one, is the Reduce to Ash. So it targets a creature within 60 feet, and if the creature fails a Constitution save, it takes 5d10 necrotic damage, and its hit point maximum is reduced by an amount equal to the necrotic damage taken. So, the average is 27. So, if it deals 27 damage and it also reduces your hit point maximum by 27 until the creature finishes a long rest. Now, if the target's hit point maximum is reduced to 0, the body and everything it's wearing and carrying, except for magic items, are reduced to ash, and a creature reduced to ash that way cannot be revived by any means short of a wish spell. So, if you are the kind of DM that really wants to torture your players, you could basically annihilate one of the players or one of the PCs and say to that player, "Hey, till you guys get your hands on a wish spell, that PC is gone. No other way of getting it back." You really have to know your players well to be able to do that, because that could literally just crush the soul of a player in a D&D game. And of course, as DMs, we feed on the bitter tears of our players, but you still want them to come back next week and play in your game. So you got to be kind of careful about how bitterly you crush their soul and whether you want to push them that far, because they might just say, "Forget this, I'm not coming back." And they might just leave the game if you did that to them. So be a little careful about how you use that. Now, here's the Archon mounts. The Ashen Riders would have either the bull or the winged lion. Their armor class isn't great, either 12 or 13. They do have a pretty good hit point total. The bull has 95 hit points. The lion has 114 hit points. And they both fly at a speed of 60 feet. They both understand Celestial and can't speak. They're both CR4 monsters. The bull has the charge attack. So if it charges and deals a gore attack, then it deals an extra 3d12 of piercing damage, and the gore by itself deals 2d12 plus 5 piercing. So that would be 5d12 plus 5 piercing if it charges and hits with a gore attack. Then the pounce attack, that's kind of like the same thing that a wolf does, where if it attacks from a pounce, you have to make a strength save or you're knocked prone. The bite will deal 2d10 plus 5 piercing damage, and the claws will deal 2d8 plus 5 slashing damage. Now, it doesn't say that it gets multiple attacks, so my presumption would be that it would have to choose either a bite attack or a claw attack. Of course, if it's working along with the Ashen Rider, just having that one extra attack is going to be bad enough. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of just how tough and just how fierce these monsters might be if you happen to face them in combat. And so this is we're going to go back to our slides here. All right, and now let's take a look at how you might use these guys in encounters. All right, so we always say that the goal with using a monster in the encounter is, how am I going to create a hard encounter for a party of 5 PCs at a given level. So if and this is considering just the Ashen Rider by itself, because if you consider it with the mount, that's actually going to push it even into another category and make it super difficult for the players to deal with. So at 11 and 12, the Ashen Rider by itself would be a hard encounter for a party of 5 PCs. Now, at level 13 through 15, just the Ashen Rider is a medium encounter. At level 15, to push it over into a hard encounter, you could add a CR4 monster. Hey, guess what? Not only are Coatls CR4, but their mounts are CR4 as well. So you could actually set up the party against the Ashen Rider and its mount, fighting in tandem against the CR15 party, and have that be a hard encounter. Now, once the party reaches level 16 through 20, a single Ashen Rider becomes an easy encounter. At level 20, you could throw the extra Ashen Rider and its mount in there. So now you have 2 of these Ashen Riders and 2 of the mounts to deal with for a level 20 party. And that's going to keep a level 20 party really busy because you have 5 PCs, you got 4 enemies. Those 4 enemies are all capable of dealing significant damage and pretty big hit bonuses on all of their attacks. All right, we discussed a little bit of this during looking at the stat block, but I did want to go ahead and talk about tactics you could use as or a tactical review of fighting against the Ashen Rider as a players. So something you got to watch out for is that Aura of Silence DC 18 Wisdom save, and that lasts until the start of the next turn. So or the start of the Ashen Rider's next turn, so that you can't cast spells, and there's no way at the end of your turn for you to save against that, because that effect automatically goes away as soon as the Ashen Rider's next turn comes around. The innate spell casting of the Ashen Rider is almost all focused on battlefield control. So command, just mess with people, make them do something for a particular round. The compelled duel, that is going to give you disadvantage when you're fighting anything other than the Ashen Rider itself. Banishment, you could target or one of your very tough characters, like let's say your barbarian, who typically are not the smartest characters or the wisest characters. You could force them to make wisdom saves, or boop, just be taken out of the battle for a minute and leave the rest of the party to fight against the Ashen Rider. And that blade barrier, that's just going to kind of put up an area where the PCs are not going to want to go in there and get chewed up by those blades. The flying mount presents an opportunity for the Ashen Rider to teleport away from the battlefield to an aerial platform. And if the party doesn't have anything that can reach that 120-foot range, the Ashen Rider could come down, attack with the sword a couple of times, maybe take a little damage, then teleport back up into the saddle, and then start using that Ashen Bolt. And then if you really tick it off and it wants to use that ability, that legendary ability, where it can reduce your maximum hit points, it can start hitting you with that. And that's probably at the point when the party is going to go, oh, holy cow, we've got to do something. And, either we've got to end this fight now or we got to get out of here. Uh, the fact that it has both melee and range attacks, deals both radiant and necrotic damage, is a really powerful combination. So now, if you are using this as a DM, uh, you have all of these other things that you can come out of, you can take out of your pocket and throw at the characters. A lot of times you'll notice that as you're running games, characters will fall into a rhythm where the players will learn each other's character strengths. For instance, in the Sunday game, the core of that group has been together for quite a long time. So they've learned different things like the monk gets a boatload of attacks and doesn't necessarily deal a lot of damage with every attack, but he has a devastating ability to do a stunning strike. So he can come in and he can do battlefield control by targeting somebody like a spellcaster, punching the spellcaster and then stunning that spellcaster and keeping it from being able to make attacks or cast spells or things of that nature. Also, he can do that sometimes to very beefy um, melee enemies, where he can take those out of the fight and sort of reduce the amount of damage that the party is taking by basically locking that guy up and making him not be able to do his thing. Um, the uh, so if you know that some of your players are going to do this, you can sort of target certain abilities of the Ashen Rider at certain PCs if you want to make the encounter that much more challenging. For example, that banishment. Find your biggest damage dealer and try to banish them and get them out of the fight. Do that early. The one thing that I will reiterate as a DM, the one ability you want to be very cautious about when you use it in the fight is you want to be careful about using that reduce to ash ability. If as a DM, I would probably counsel open with that. Open with that and make that be the first thing that the Ashen Rider does. Here's the reason why. You hit somebody with that and you knock their hit points down and you tell them, oh, by the way, your maximum hit points have just been reduced by that much. That will put terror into the hearts of your players right off the bat. It also really avoids, especially since you're going against higher level PCs, it almost completely avoids the chance that you're going to actually annihilate the character with that reduced to ash ability. If you have the Ashen Rider open with other abilities and they fight and they get some of the PCs down and whittled down and lower hit points, and then they turn around and they do that reduced to ash, you know, if there's a PC that's under 40 hit points and you connect with that reduced to ash, there's a significant chance that you could, literally destroy that PC. And it may not be what you wanted to do as a DM, but that's what happens with that ability. You destroy it. So then you're left with, even if the campaign arc is going to be, okay, now we've got to go find somebody with a wish spell so we can get this character back, what is that player going to do between now and the time that they reach that other one? You either have to have the kind of player that's going to be, okay, I'm going to roll with that, I'm going to play a temporary character until we get my old character back, or a player who said, I'm not sure where this character is going, and I kind of got this other idea of this other character you want to play, and then say, okay, well, if anything were to happen to your character, would you be all right with bringing somebody in? Oh yeah, I would be. Okay, well then you can maybe use that ability on that character, but that's a conversation you've had with that player beforehand, and they know that this is a real possibility that something may happen to that character. The other thing, of course, is if you have a player that for whatever reason is going to leave the game. In my case, all of my games are on Roll20, but people work different schedules, and maybe a schedule changes and they can't make it to the game anymore. All right. Well, how do you want you to write your character out? I've got an idea. If you don't, we can send one of these after the party, and it can use this reduced to ash ability. That is then going to set that Ashen Rider up as an enemy that the party is guaranteed going to want to hunt down and finish. And if they feel like that Ashen Rider has been sent by some sort of other entity, like a demon lord or an evil god or something like that, heck, the party is going to go after the Ashen Rider and then going to turn around and go after the one that sent them. So that can that can add a real reason, kick in the pants to a party that kind of is getting very, very late in their development and maybe is starting to feel like they don't know what they're going to do with all of this because they've got a lot of money and they may have opportunities that their PCs can retire and can go off and just start becoming lords and dukes and all this other kind of stuff. I guarantee you come along and you kill a PC and not just kill it, but annihilate it so that you can't even resurrect it. That's going to give them an incentive to stay together as an adventuring party and go get some revenge. At least that's going to happen with most adventuring groups, I think. All right, so where would you put these in a campaign? Uh, Obviously, if you're adventuring in Theros, this is going to be in your late tier 3 or tier 4 adventures just because of the challenge rating of the monster. But you could, if you're not in Theros, you could really mess with the players by tossing out these enemies. Um, Celestials, as we've already seen by creature type, they're good. They're supposed to be good. Uh, a number of divine spellcasting classes either have features or spells that mean, oh, hey, that's a celestial. It must be coming to help us. Yeah, what if it's one of these celestials that is showing up? Perhaps, like I said, sent by an evil god, or maybe maybe you have a player that follows a god of justice. What is it like? Tyr. Tyr is the god of justice and sort of like absolute justice. Uh, maybe, maybe Tyr has a few Ashen Riders on retainer. And maybe when somebody really torques off Tyr because they have done something that is such a huge miscarriage of justice, Tyr says, I'm going to teach that one a lesson. And they maybe send an Ashen Rider after them. And if the party just happens to be too close when that happens, oh, okay, you might see you might see something that's very unexpected. Um, and in a high level campaign that's not in Theros, another idea is that when an Ashen Rider shows up, it could be a sign that a god that is normally followed by good worshippers has either somehow been corrupted or perhaps one of the god's most powerful servants has been corrupted and now is sending out these Ashen Riders. So, there's a lot of things you could do depending on, how much your campaign hinges on things to do with celestials and the divine and the interference of the gods in um, mortal affairs and whatnot. So, how could you reskin this monster? Celestials that are evil are very, very rare. And in a homebrew, you have an opportunity to reskin the Ashen Rider as a fiend that appears fair but is incredibly evil. Think about a lot of the popular mythology about about the devil in Western civilization. A lot of times, the devil is not depicted as this scary, evil person who shows up and strikes terror into the hearts of people. A lot of times, the devil is depicted as sort of this insidious person that shows up with a smooth talking charmer and makes people feel like they are going to get a benefit, and then makes them an offer and says, hey, you can have this wonderful thing. I just need this little tiny pledge from you. I just need the pledge that I'm going to get your soul when in exchange for this gift that I'm going to give you. And you might reskin an Ashen Rider as a creature like that. Or you might reskin the Ashen Rider as somebody that a powerful demon lord sends after someone who tries to break one of those contracts. Oh, you got this benefit from dealing with Asmodeus. And now you want to try to renege on your agreement with Asmodeus. Hey, Ashen Rider, go deal with that guy. Teach him what happens when you try to cross Asmodeus. Uh, you know, so you could do that. You could have that as a template for something that you could use the Ashen Rider stat block for. Um, you could create them as a divine punisher. We already talked about Tyr. Uh, let's say you have a paladin of Tyr in your party, and that paladin has done something intentionally or unintentionally to displease Tyr, and an Ashen Rider is sent after them. Maybe the party defeats them, but maybe somewhere on the corpse or on the armor of the Ashen Rider after it's defeated, the party finds something that they realize this was sent by Tyr. Okay, now your paladin has to go to the church and say, okay, Tyr sent this, and they were targeting me. Why? Well, now there could be a whole arc of your campaign of where that paladin has to go and try to figure out what they've done and atone for it and get back in the god's good graces. So it's another wrinkle you can use instead of simply your cleric or your paladin waking up one day, going to pray for their spells and getting static. That's the classic sign that you've done something to upset your deity in D&D. Is you pray for spells as a cleric and nothing happens. Okay, now what? um, so this is a potential thing that could happen. So let's see. Oh, all right. We have reached time for Q&A. Let me go over and double check. All right. Okay. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I am going to go into the wrap up and then I will go back and check with the chat and see if you have any questions that we haven't covered yet in this episode. I am DM Gallibond. I have 4 streams that I do every week here on the Twitch channel. There's a Sunday Planeswalking game, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Walker of Waterdeep. There's the Sword Coast Chronicles, Thursday nights at 8 p.m. It's our love letter to the 5th edition published campaigns from Wizards of the Coast, where we weave in and out of the storylines of all of those campaigns. Then there's the Lost Mine of Original D&D Saturday nights at 7:30. This is a retelling of the Lost Mine of Phandelver, but we are setting that in the rules from the original edition game and seeing just how differently the game plays out. Our our party in that game, they have decided to make it, well, let's just conquer the world and take over and make ourselves an empress and her merry band of misfits. And so they are building a goblin army because when you charm a person, which includes monstrous humanoids like goblins and hobgoblins and everything, when you charm a person in original D&D, they stay charmed for 30 days. So you don't constantly have to have them losing um, grip on or losing the hold of that charm. And the other thing that happens, it says right in the charm person spell that the way they react when the charm wears off depends on how they've been treated. So if a bugbear or a hobgoblin is charmed and is given a position of authority and have more goblins put under them that they can control and rule, when that charm wears off, they're probably going to say, hey, well, I'm in a better place than I was when I got charmed in the first place. Maybe this person isn't so bad. Or if they try to resist me, just charm them again. it's, it's a stupid bugbear. It's not going to have a very easy time of resisting that charm. So that's kind of fun. All of those are here on the Twitch channel. We have archives of all of the games up through the end of December over on the YouTube channel. And the Sunday game, we are caught up to an archive of every session except for yesterday's. Yesterday's is the only session I have yet to put up on that channel, and that'll be up this week. Hopefully, by the end of this week, we will be caught up to the present time on all of the campaigns. Then there's also a Patreon if anybody really wants to support the channel and help us do more. And there's some exciting news that hasn't been updated on the Twitch yet because I just got the confirmation today. But we are now part of the Game Rebel network. So one of the things you'll see is that the team channels are now down below on the Twitch channel, and those are ones that are part of the auto hosting. So when I am not broadcasting, there's a good chance that somebody else from Game Rebel Network will be hosted on the channel while I am not live. So that is good. Now, let me go back to the chat and take a look here. Okay. Can you use these as an ally if you have an evilly aligned party member? Well, I would say yes, if you have somebody that is lawful evil. Because remember, these archons, they are after justice. And justice without mercy is typically lawful evil. If you look at, let's say, a lot of the lore around Asmodeus, Asmodeus is the Lord of Tyranny. And then I think in the Faerun pantheon, I think Bane is the god of tyranny as well. So you could have these as servants of a uh, god of tyranny that it's sort of like their church is the kind that if there's a law about spitting on the sidewalk and you wind up spitting on the sidewalk, they'll just come along with their greatsword and chop your head off because you broke the law. Yeah, it might have been a minor infraction of a small law, but you broke the law, you deserve to be punished, and this is what's going to happen to you. So Now, clearly, they would probably not be sending Ashen Riders after commoners, but if you have somebody that's uh, maybe not a clergy of the church, but somebody who's an important follower of the church who gets out of line, or somebody that the church declares as an enemy who is maybe a powerful ruler or something like that, then yes, one of these Ashen Riders could come along and deal a uh, deal a really bad blow to that guy. So yeah, thank you for the question. Uh, yeah, that's lots of different things you can think of, and of course, a lot of the stuff I think of that's just my thoughts. Uh, in D&D, when you are at the table, your game, you can decide how you want to use these things, how you want to use monsters in a game, and you'll also have situations that'll come up that will be brought to you by your players, and they will inspire different ways of doing things. So, thank you. Thank you again for that question. All right. I think I don't see any other questions on the chat, so I appreciate that, and I'm just going to go ahead and wish everybody a good night, and I'll sign off as I always do by reminding you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.